For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond.
This is The Space Shot, episode 437, a Skylab 50th Extravaganza. Hey everyone, I'm John Molnix, and welcome to The Space Shot. In today's episode, we've got three incredible guests joining us for a discussion on Skylab's 50th anniversary. Before we get to that, though, I've got some news on a book prize / movie / jewelry giveaway that I'm doing to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Skylab. From now until the splashdown of Skylab 3 on September 25th, make sure you sign up for the Space Shot Substack. Say that 10 times fast. The link is in the show notes for a chance to win some cool prizes. I'll be drawing a name / email subscriber every week from the launch of Skylab 3 until the end of September. The final 2 weeks will have some awesome prizes, like a signed copy of Homesteading Space, the Skylab story, which I think is probably the 5th copy of that book that I've bought at this point, plus a Blu-ray of Searching for Skylab, which is an amazing documentary that you'll hear more about here in this episode, plus some fun space-themed coffee from a little coffee shop in Colorado, and I'll also be giving away some cool space-themed jewelry and stickers, which you can see more of at starlightandgleam.com. The first giveaway winner will be announced on July 28th, which is the 50th anniversary of the launch of Skylab 3, so make sure you sign up for the Substack today. Now, here's a super fun conversation that I had with Emily Carney, David Hitt, and Dwight Steven-Boniecki. I do have a correction to make, and I feel bad that I have to normally have everyone introduce themselves before we start doing a podcast, and I forgot to this time. Dwight's last name is actually Polish, so it's closer to, and I hope I don't butcher this, Boniecki. I'll have Dwight on again in the future so we can chat about the making of the documentary, Searching for Skylab, and also him and his background and what he does in the community at large. Everybody was just awesome to talk to for this episode. I really, really had a good time. So apologies to Dwight for messing that up. I'm usually better about it because people always try to add extra L's or N's or I's to my last name. Lastly, the audio clip that you're about to hear is the prank that was played during Skylab 3. Owen Garriott's wife, Helen, recorded this bit that you're about to hear, and it's what we mentioned later on in the episode.
Hello, Houston? This is Skylab. Are you reading me down there? Hello, Houston. Are you reading Skylab?
Skylab, this is Houston. I heard you all right, but I had a little difficulty recognizing your voice. Who we got on the line here?
Oh, Houston, Roger. Well, I haven't talked with you for a while. Isn't that you down there, Bob? This is Helen here in Skylab. The boys hadn't had a home-cooked meal in so long, I thought I'd just bring one up. Over?
Roger, Skylab. I think somebody's got to be pulling my leg. Helen, is that really you? Where are you?
Bob? Gosh, just a few orbits ago, we were looking down on the forest fires in California. You know, the smoke sure does cover a lot of territory. And, oh, Bob, the sunrises are just beautiful. Uh-oh, I have to cut off now. I see the boys are floating up toward the command module, and I'm not supposed to be talking to you. See you later, Bob.
Bye-bye. Skylab, Houston, we have you scheduled to inhibit attacks here due to the little problem we had earlier today and the momentum not being quite in a nominal configuration. We'd like to hold up on that for a while.
Now, here's the chat with Emily, David, Dwight, and myself. Enjoy. So today I am joined by three of my favorite space historians and people here. We've got Emily Carney, David Hitt, and Dwight Steven-Boniecki. Did I say that right? Okay.
You did.
I should have checked before I started, but okay.
It's all good. It's all
good. So today we're going to be talking and focusing on the second manned Skylab mission, Skylab 3, which launched on July 28th, 1973. This was a really interesting mission. Alan Bean, Jack Lausma, and Owen Garriott were the second crew on the station. And let's just kind of start it off with the launch being moved up. So that was kind of an anomaly in the spaceflight world. Usually things get pushed back.
My memory of that mission starts with a thruster floating by the window, so I'm useless before that.
We can start with that. I mean, like, because launching early, I mean, like, that just kind of happened. But the thruster floating by the window is a very interesting point to kind of jump in with the crew, I think.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they had a pretty much a textbook launch. It was a bit cloudy, similar to the first when the space station itself launched. You didn't see it for that much longer after it left the launch, cleared the tower. And then, while they were achieving orbit, suddenly something floats by the window.
Not something you want to see.
And that's bad. Like that's
Yeah, I think it was Jack Lausma who was like, "Hey, we got a thruster floating by the window," and they were like, "What? Like, that's not good." And I think it turned out it was ice from the thruster, but it looked like a thruster floating by, which is it's kind of funny, but
the good news was it wasn't actually a thruster. The bad news was it really didn't matter that it wasn't a thruster, because in terms of the implications for the mission, it really wasn't that much difference. The ice had frozen up inside the thruster, had floated out. They knew that they had a leak, and having a leak in your thruster really isn't any better than not having the thruster there at all. So they had to shut down that quad and had to in space. I was going to say figure out how. Now, they had trained for this. I mean, so they had some ground knowledge of what this is like. Not exactly the same as doing it in space doing the real thing, but so piloting an Apollo CSM with one quad shut down.
Yes, but it didn't end there. It didn't end there.
But wait, there's more.
After they docked, David or Emily, it was about a week after they docked, several days at least after they docked.
Well, so before we dock them though, because that was I loved hearing Owen telling this story. Right, yes. So you can fly. It turns out, if you're ever in this situation and you need to fly an Apollo CSM with one of the quads shut down, it's perfectly doable. You can do it. It's just the vehicle handles a little bit differently because anything that you put into the controls, you get what you ask for, but then you also get a little something that you didn't ask for, and so there's a lot of compensating for you're trying to go up and you're going up, but also a little bit faster, or you're turning left, but also getting a bit of yaw or what have you, and so they're coming up on Skylab, and again, you got to keep in mind this is 50 years ago, right? So the technology then, not what it is today. They don't have a range rate gauge on the spacecraft. They can see how far they are from Skylab, but they don't know exactly how quick they're coming up on the thing. And so Owen is sitting in the command module, and he sees Skylab coming up, and he's this thing's coming up a little bit faster than it should have. And so he's got his watch, and he's got his pocket calculator, and he can see the range to Skylab, and so he's manually, as they're approaching, calculating how fast they're coming up on this thing, and he's telling Alan Bean, who's flying the spacecraft, Al, we're coming up kind of fast, and Al's, no, we're good, we're fine, I feel good about this, and they keep closing in, and Owen's still sitting there with his calculator, punching in the numbers, and and getting concerned, and telling Al, Al, no, really, you need to slow down. You're coming up with this thing too fast. And I was, no, I got it. And so Owen's sitting there, and he's punching in the numbers, and he's checking the range, and he's doing the calculations, looking at his watch, and finally he's like, no, we're going in too fast. Doesn't bother telling Bean anymore. He gets out of his seat and gets down behind the couches. And Al Bean says, well, I had never seen him do that before. So I should probably take this seriously. Starts slowing down, and they come in and make a perfectly fine docking. But but Owen was telling me this story, and then when I was working on Bold Day Rise, he's telling the story of STS-9 coming in at the end of the mission with the space shuttle, on fire. The computer's on fire as they're coming in and landing the spacecraft. John Young bringing the thing home safely, landing the shuttle on fire. They get out, they turn back, they look at the spacecraft. Owen says, "Well, I've never seen it do that before." So if you ever hear an astronaut say, "I've never seen it do that before," that's apparently the thing these stories have in common. Be worried. Be worried. Like that's probably an off-nominal situation.
Oh my gosh, that's one of my favorite stories in the book. I was listening to the audiobook version of it when I was driving this last week. In all places, Enid, Oklahoma, where one of my stores is. So I was listening to that actually as I was driving out of Enid the other day. So that was pretty fortuitous timing. So yeah, now that the crew's docked, things, Dwight, you were starting to talk about things getting a little weird.
It doesn't end there. Alan Bean, who's well known as being the best friend of TV cameras, they turn the camera on as they're approaching Skylab. And what does the camera decide to do? The color wheel that was sending the sequential red, blue, green colors that were then composited on the ground to make color television, decides to jam and block 1/3 of the screen. Right? And if I remember correctly, Alan Bean used exactly the same technique he tried on the moon. He got a hammer and whacked it. But it didn't work. So they had this like a black and white feed with it looks like basically you're shooting out the window and the bit of the window is blocking the view. But Alan Bean and cameras, and of course he was knocked on the head by the dislodging 16mm camera when Apollo 12 splashed down. So Alan Bean and cameras, I don't know.
I wonder where that camera is on display. That would be a funny thing to ask Shannon next time I'm at the Cosmosphere, if they have that 16mm camera.
Just look for the one with the covered in blood.
Oh my goodness. Oh man. So they get docked eventually, technical malfunctions aside, and then living and working in Skylab. They're the second crew to do that. What are some of your guys' favorite stories from that mission? And we can start at the beginning, the end of the mission. You want to jump in wherever. Just share some of your favorites.
But I think Dwight was about to tell us about the weather about a week into the mission. So why don't you let Dwight pick up there?
Yes, that's right.
About a week, several days after they docked, then suddenly all the master alarms trigger with a propellant leak warning, again from the CSM. And so Alan Bean rushes into the command service module trying to figure out what's going on here. And that's when they realize there's some serious problems happening with the RCS thrusters, because Jack Lousma was telling us the story where he's sitting in front of the panel and just saying, I couldn't ignore any of those alarms. And that's when they figured out that there was some serious trouble with the RCS. And if I remember correctly, they organised a conference with Chris Kraft, advising them about the rescue mission, which is then a story unto itself, with regards to the second man Skylab crew, because they were in a situation where consideration was given to rescuing them because they couldn't have flown, or they weren't sure if they could fly the command module back down to Earth because of the thruster problems.
Again, not a situation you want to be in on a spacecraft. So I'm losing count of how many we've had already for the second flight.
Look, this was actually a good situation, though, for Vance and Don Lynn, because it looked like they were going to get real close to going to space. And, they'd been waiting for 8 years or so to go to space, because they were in the 1966 astronaut class. So, they went in the simulator and, started working and stuff. And then to make a long story short, they found out you could actually re-enter with a lot of thrusters out. So they kind of worked their way out of a job. Unfortunately, they did so well that they proved that they did not need the job. So unfortunately, they were stuck on Earth. But I think for Brand, though, I believe he was already selected for Apollo Soyuz. So, I mean, he was going to go to space in about 2 years around 2 years from that point. So it does have a sort of a silver lining. Lind, of course, waited for, God, 12 more years or something crazy
Yeah,
like that.
but I've got footage of him that the BBC filmed during Apollo 11 where he's talking about, when he hopes to fly. I'm thinking, wow, he had to wait quite a long time. I think
Yeah,
like Bruce McCandless.
Yeah, total of 19 years he was in the Corps before his flight.
yeah. But yeah. So essentially, they did such a great job that they proved that they didn't need the job. Sort of. So they ended up staying on Earth, unfortunately. And I think the rescue vehicle. I could be wrong, but I want to say the rescue vehicle's on display at the Saturn V Center at Kennedy Space Center. So if you go to Kennedy Space Center and you go in the Saturn V Center, if you're by the tail, the party end of the Saturn V that has all the nice engines, I believe the F1 engines. If you look like to your right, you should see the rescue vehicle. So, and it's you can like walk right up to it and look at it and stuff. I'm sure it's not in the same configuration as it was back then. They probably pulled out a lot of the good stuff in there, but you can actually view it. So, and it's never been used. And of course, the same place has a seasoned command module as well. Has Apollo 14, if you want to look at that. So it's got two command modules in slightly different configurations. So, but yeah, that's kind of a neat story, the Skylab rescue story. I always loved it because I read Vance Brand has actually a book, and it's called Flying Higher and Faster. It's like his autobiography, and I read it, and some of he's very dry, like he has a very dry sense of humor. He's very what's the word, restrained. He's in real life he's very, if you actually meet him, he's very sort of like quiet, but he gets in some good digs, though. You just have to sort of wait for him. He gets in some funny jokes, and that whole book is like, yeah, I was getting excited. I thought, man, I might go to space this time, and of course it didn't happen. So yeah, because he'd been on a bunch of backup crews by that time.
He's
So
ready
yeah,
to go.
it's a good read. If you can get the book, go read it. But yeah, it's just funny. So yeah, it turns out they didn't need the rescue vehicle after all. But it's kind of a neat aside in the Skylab story that it could have been something that it would have been cool because it would have had 5 people on it, which is nuts. That's a lot of people. And
Yeah.
if you've seen inside of the command module, it's not that big. So that would have been kind of a sporty ride back. So yeah.
Well, so because you've got 3 seats in Apollo command module. You've got to add 2 more seats to the thing. There's not a whole lot of room. So how do you do this? Well, the 3 seats are sort of suspended up from the floor of the spacecraft, and they've got shock absorbers. And so the plan was you're going to put the additional seats by adding a second row, so that people are sitting underneath the primary seats. Well, like I said, they've got shock absorbers in these things, so that the couches would stroke. So if you came in, if they had to land on land for some reason instead of a water landing, it would have been a harder impact. The Apollo command modules were designed for the seats to give, and they just kind of collapse back towards the back of the vehicle in the event of a land landing. Well, okay, so now we're putting people in that area underneath the couches where they collapse down. So what does that mean? And the answer was, so long as we land in water, we don't see a problem. So what if we don't land in water? And the answer was, yeah, that probably won't happen. So, they were flying they were going to be flying, had they flown the thing, with a little bit of knowledge of, that there is a scenario, not a likely scenario, but a scenario that that maybe gets a little unpleasant. But yeah,
Worse than somebody, reclining their airliner seat all the way back. nowhere to go.
It's
I'd take that over the couch stroking on Apollo any day.
Like Emily said, the way it played out was it was kind of unintentionally borderline cruel that they put them in the simulator and made them first prove that they could fly to space. Would a rescue mission work? That was task one. They put them in the simulator. They make them prove, yes, it would work. Great. We can fly a rescue mission. We're going to space. Okay, before you go to space, though, we're going to put you back in the simulator. We've got one more job for you, and that's proof that we don't need you to go to space. Again, like Emily said, they do such a great job. They work themselves out of a flight to space. I talked to both of them individually, and I loved this because this was before Vance's book came out. Talked to them both individually, asked both of them. That had to have been like an emotional roller coaster. I mean, what were you feeling at the end of that? Were you kind of disappointed to have succeeded in the second task? And both of them, because they are astronauts and because they're astronauts from the 60s, both of them very stoically, well, I understood that was what needed to be done, and and I was just proud to have been able to serve. But I think the other guy was disappointed.
Always blame it on the other guy. Yeah,
that's funny.
So yeah,
it is sad, man. Vance could have been the guy in the shower who's been used in every Skylab textbook, every picture of Skylab since like mid 1973. It could have been him. It might have not been Jack after all. So who knows how history would have gone if this had happened, right?
They really, For All Mankind should hire us to do a spin-off movie of For All Mankind.
Like a sitcom.
Oh man.
But it would be like a sitcom, though. It wouldn't be like a dramatic. It would be like kind of like Seinfeld, except like bow, 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 and then like Vance and show up like, hey, we're here to rescue y'all.
It's like that
with space shorts.
Yeah.
Now, there's one thing I must say. It's a good thing the CSM, because I got a little friend here. He's saying, talking on about me, that they did manage to stay up in Skylab for SL3 longer because they did the student experiments. And my favorite part of all this Skylab 3 stuff is this fellow. They had two spiders up there, Anita and Arabella. And there were, I think, 20, David, you might know, Emily, 26, 25 student experiments.
That sounds about right.
Sounds about right, yeah. Because I'm trying to think experiments total, but that's way, way more. Yeah, I think they had 25 or 26. I think in total they had, like over 300 or something insane. That's for the whole program.
When you read what these kids did, it's amazing to think they're all grandparents now, right? Back then they were like 15, 16. Now they're in their late 60s, if not 70s, late 60s. Of all the student experiments, the one that is talked about the most is the spider experiment, which was by Judy Miles, who wanted to know if spiders in zero-G would form their webs in the same way as when they were on Earth, or there would be differences. And they were extensively studied by Owen Garriott as well. If I remember correctly, there's the sequence of photos where he's doing the televised the televised experiments about how the spiders reacted in zero gravity. Unfortunately, both of them didn't make it back down to Earth.
I mean, I feel like there's a long tradition of science experiments that sadly animals go up, but they don't always come back down, which is unfortunate. But, it's helping push the boundaries of what we know about space. So that's a good thing, I guess.
I was going to say, if you want to be depressed someday, read Colin Burgess's Animals in Space, because
nope,
it's not a series of happy endings.
I can't read that book. Yeah, I saw it this time and I was like, nah, I'm good. I don't need this one. I love Colin. Nothing personal against Colin Burgess. Can't do this one. Sorry. Love you, Colin, but nope.
I'm pretty sure my kitty cat back there would have something to say about that if I was reading that book.
You need to read the Cooper book. That's the best one on Skylab.
Oh God, don't get me started on this.
I was
Come
gonna
on.
say, oh
No.
no.
I don't want to go scorched earth today.
I'm pretty sure I just saw Emily's eyes shoot lasers out at me.
I mean, this is for my podcast, so I mean, like, I don't have an explicit rating yet, but like, I'm sure we've got some choice words for that book. I would prefer
be
not to
awesome.
have to mark it as
Yeah.
a mature rating.
On Spotify, it's like an episode about space history with an
Trust the Australian to bring that one up.
Explicit.
what happened on this one.
There's one thing I will say just to cap off the student experiments. I've been lucky enough to speak to a couple of them. And I got to tell you, I feel like an absolute moron when I talk to these people because what they have done with their careers, starting with these experiments. And you're like, oh, Kathy Jackson, for example, she's a lecturer at, I can't remember the name of the university. All these kids ended up being very, very, what's the word in English? Proficient at the careers they chose as a result of what they were doing on Skylab. And I love hanging around these people, but I also feel very imposter syndrome-ish when I'm around them.
And actually, I saw an article somewhere where somebody tracked down the students, like 50, basically, a half century later, and kind of caught up with them. And if I can find that, I'll drop it in the show notes. But it's amazing the careers that they had. It wasn't always just science related. I mean, wasn't one of them like a spy or something like that, I want to say. Like they had a very diverse career path from the stuff that they did back in the 70s for that experiment. But
I want to read that.
I'll have to find it. I read it a while ago, so I will include it in the show notes if I can find it.
One of them is in Hawaii doing geological surveying and so forth, studying the volcanic activity on the islands of Hawaii. So he's living the luxury life. He says he loves it.
That sounds pretty nice.
Mm.
Anything with Hawaii and
If people are further interested in the student experiments, there is a NASA book they released, I think in the late 70s. And there's actually a really cool series, and I think it was published in 1978. But it's a big set of like a lot of the findings from Skylab, medical findings, Earth resources, etc. A New Sun, which is a really cool book. It's about some of the solar physics findings. It's also part of that set, but there's a student experiment book as well, which is kind of neat if you're into that. There's a lot of 70s fashions in there too. If you're really into that, there's a lot of Rusty Schweikert with an afro in it, which is just amazing. So no, seriously though, that book is really cool, and I think it's probably available on PDF if you really want to read it. So if you could probably find it on the internet on probably archives.org for free, but if you want the hard copy, I'm sure there's probably a few of them floating on Amazon as well if you really want to read the book.
That's Classroom in Space.
Yes, A Classroom in Space, and Joe Kerwin is on the cover of the book with like a microscope. It's and it's not a very big book. It's sort of a slim volume. I think the biggest volume in that whole series is the medical findings. It's not all of the medical findings, but it's a big chunk of them, and it's like enormous. So if you really want to read about the medical findings of Skylab, go get that book. But I'm just letting you know it's huge. And I didn't understand much of it because I'm not a doctor. So because I tried reading it and I'm like, yeah, I had no idea what they were talking about. So, but anyway, I think I'm getting off topic. Are we still talking about our favorite sort of moments from the mission and stuff like that?
Yeah, you're good. I mean, Rusty Schweikert with an afro, I mean, that could be a favorite moment of the mission. So I think we're still on topic for that. So go ahead with your
afro. Yeah, this was like the whole early 70s for no reason. Just he had an afro. But no, I think my favorite highlights from Skylab 3, and I know Dwight and David have seen this, and I know you probably have seen it too, John. It's available on YouTube. Is the tour that Jack Lausma gives of Skylab. Jack Lausma is awesome, of course. If you've ever met him, he's very personable. He's probably, I like to say he's the friend. I mean, most of the astronauts are very friendly, but he is like above and beyond one of the most, friendly, helpful astronauts there is. He's really cool. But he gives a tour of Skylab, and it's really cool because you get a good um, he's a good tour guide. He's funny, he's nice and stuff. He's the perfect person to give the tour. But another thing about it is you really get a picture of what it looked like in there, and like how everything was laid out in Skylab. So if you ever want to find out, like, okay, how was the actual space station sort of oriented and laid out, that's a really good place to start. And it is on YouTube. It's not the best quality, but it's from 1973. Um, but yeah, another. It has a clip of I think it was Garriott doing barbershop on Alan Bean's hair, stuff like that. Like sort of little like candid moments of what it's like to live in space, things like that. I don't think this is part of the tour, but there's also the famous, which I've referred to earlier in this podcast, the famous shower scene with Jack Lausma. I think that shower photo has probably been more associated with Skylab than anything from any of the three missions, which is kind of sad. But there is actually like I think what it comes from is Bean and Lausma actually did a demo of the shower, and it was to show people, hey, this is how we shower in space, what fun and stuff. The truth is, I think that was the only time Lausma used it because it was a real pain it was a pain to use. It took like hours for you to use it because you had to squirt the water and wipe it up so it wasn't like very user friendly because you just don't have gravity in there, and on Earth you have gravity in the shower. Space not so much, so it doesn't work like a Earth shower. But yeah, in reality I think that was the only time they used it because they found out like sponge baths were just easier. I don't think Garriott used the shower at all. That's not saying he's dirty or anything, but I think he was like, I ain't doing this, so he never used it. So yeah, so that's sort of the story behind those pictures. Because if you look at the pictures, you would think, wow, they were using that thing every day. They were not. I think they actually avoided it because it was just such a. I think they all tried it except for Garriott. I think Garriott was like, I ain't doing this. So, but yeah, it was kind of more of a pain than it was worth. So I don't think it was very popular, but they did do a demo of it because that was kind of like a fun thing. Like, wow, it even has a shower, That's so cool. So they did demo it. And unfortunately, Jack was the model for that. He was the supermodel of the world for that. So
I mean,
so,
the picture of Pete in the shower is pretty hilarious too. So I mean, I feel like everybody always talks about Jack's picture, but there's also Pete just kind of
yeah.
holding on to the. Just as funny. I'm glad you mentioned the tour because I'll link to those videos in the show notes too. Just the interior volume of Skylab. That to me, like across all the missions, is one of my favorite things about it. Is it was just massive. Um, I want to say like the interior, like the pressurized volume of Skylab in like one piece is basically what the International Space Station has, give or take, a little bit of, cubic feet or cubic meters, however you measure it. But just the fact that they launched that one massive station just still kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, and it remains the largest, I think, single object put in space, and probably to come back from space as well. But
I'm glad you mentioned that. The coming back to space part, that was the there was an anniversary of Skylab re-entering just a few days ago, as of the day we're recording this. Dwight, do you want to talk a little bit about your connection with that?
Well, I remember vividly as a little boy, as it missed me. It missed me by about that much. I remember going to bed the night that it struck, and in Australia, that we were part of the footprint, right? It was not guaranteed it was going to hit Australia. It was just we were in the flight path. We knew that. So they made a big deal about it the night before. I went to bed, which around about, like 8 o'clock-ish as a 10-year-old would. It was a school day, I remember that. And actually, the impact is where my interest in Skylab first officially started, because there was a student that put in the principal's office an info poster about, which was titled "Skylab is Falling," and then listed everything that Skylab had done while it was up there. And I thought, I was standing there reading it, and of course got interested in all the info about it coming back now. And I remember when it hit. It was for Australia. It was huge because in those days, no internet, nothing, and this little town of Esperance suddenly became the focus of the world. It had 10,000 residents there when it impacted, and for them it was a huge deal. I was very lucky to get a Umatic recording that NASA had made of news telecasts in Australia when the thing impacted. In most of the cases, this footage no longer exists in the TV archive, so I've got the surviving material. And the thing that was the funniest thing, they just set up like a shed, because Esperance is not a big town; it's tiny. And they set up a shed and charged people $1 Australian dollar to get in, 50 cents for kids. And they had bits of metal and all that was found. And I was out there for the 40th anniversary to show the film, searching for Skylab. And a lot of people came up to me and were saying, I was 10 years old as well, and we were playing on the beach, and we picked up this fiberglass, we picked up this metal stuff, everything was on the beaches, and we just threw it away. And I'm like, you what? And the one thing I must say, it's the most beautiful place on Earth that I could imagine Skylab landing in as a final resting place. It is phenomenal. And there were people up on Wireless Hill that would have seen this thing coming in. We interviewed this one farmer who was on his field, seeing this thing, the space station coming straight at him at midnight. And he just said, I stood there and thought, well, the best place to go is jumping under my tractor, which wouldn't have done a thing to help him. And the amount of debris that is still in really good shape, like, for example, the refrigerating unit, I am pretty sure if they plugged it in, they could still get that thing to work. There's a lot of artifacts that still have the soldering. You can see the wiring and the insulation and so forth, but the stuff is still intact. It's like that thing has survived an impact, coming through the atmosphere, heating to extreme levels, and yet it's still there, something you can hold in your hand. There's bits of fiberglass that have been melted down, looks like just little chunks of charcoal and plastic. It's an amazing, or the spheres. You see photographs of these huge spheres. I think they were the oxygen or what's the David? I think could have also been the propellant. I'm not quite sure, but these things are huge, right? One of them is intact, the other one has been ripped open. And these one is intact, the other one looks as if a bomb went off inside of it and ripped the thing open. There was one, and the other thing that the residents were saying, because it was coming in at supersonic speeds, there were multiple sonic booms, and the residents thought, "Oh, good God, World War III has started," because what had happened at midnight. The radio stations and I think it was NORAD had said the things impacted in the Indian Ocean were out of danger. So people went to bed thinking, okay, there's nothing going to happen. Suddenly, multiple sonic booms and this debris hitting the tin roofs of all the corrugated iron homes and sheds. And they had no idea what was going on. At the beginning, they're like, oh, what's going on here? What's going on here? Multiple booms, big flash in the sky, this thing exploding into a fireball. And then there was like, hang on a second. And if you look on YouTube, Channel 2, Australian News, has done a 90-minute video segment of the day it impacted. And originally, people were calling in the radio station going, we just saw Skylab crash. What are you talking about? It's not coming down. It's coming down as I'm speaking to you. And even NASA were going, no, you're all out of danger. And people are like, look, we've been on the phone trying to reach you. It's still coming down. And that's when the guys at NASA were like, oh, and there is footage of them in mission control getting the telephone calls from the emergency rescue services in Western Australia that were saying, look, we are getting reported sightings, and Channel 9 actually videotaped this thing coming in from the top of those TV studios in Perth. They actually videotaped it as it was crashing into Australia. It's a telescopic shot. It's still in the sky. In the film, we used a computer-generated approximation of how that would have looked. But they did actually shoot that. It's like, wow, that was a spectacular thing. And for me, I think Emily and David, you probably had the same thoughts. Skylab was a failure because it re-entered Earth. And it was right up until we interviewed Mark Pastana for the film, who worked at NORAD, where he said, you have no idea how much information we gained from heavy objects coming back down to Earth. That was anything but a failure. What we learned from that allowed us to prepare for the next time that this sort of thing happened. And my opinion from that day, that was like, okay, I was already pro Skylab. My opinion flipped. There's no way I'll refer to Skylab as a failure. No way.
Well, and I know, like, just for me, like when it's been mentioned in history classes, if at all, it's just like, oh yeah, Skylab, and then it burned up and everybody had their hats, and that's basically all it was. But like going back to, the crewed missions of it, it was anything but a failure. I mean, from the launch of the station to the initial fix with the parasol, and then with the second crew installing the tent pole, this proved so many things that we could do in space that are not possible without humans. So for me, I that's why I love it. I mean, one of the many reasons, but
So I want to tangent on that for just a second, because there's the misperception that Skylab had an uncontrolled reentry. Of course, the reality is there were people in the control room the entire time. My favorite example of that is astronaut Bonnie Dunbar. Before she was an astronaut, she was actually one of the flight controllers, bringing in Skylab. The software, I mean, this is kind of neat to me. The software that was used for Skylab's reentry was written, a few miles from where I lived at the time. So you've got, me living, near where they wrote the software that brought it in, right on top of right by where Dwight lived at the time, and now we're on the same Zoom call, 40 something years later. But yeah, that there's perception that it was the failure, and the desire to rectify that. And the reality is, for our generation, if you say the word Skylab, for our generation, the three names that come first to mind are on this call, the people most likely of our generation to be tagged on Twitter when something about Skylab is posted are currently on this call. The three people of our generation who have spent the most insane amount of time writing about and talking about and making a movie about a space program that, like, we really don't have any significant memory of are all here. I would love to hear y'all's version of why. Do you get asked why a lot?
Well, Emily, you were born in '78. You were born in '78, so you were 1 year old when it crashed. Not even, or
I'll start if you want. I guess what brought me to the Skylab story is I have very vague, like I was one when Skylab crashed down, and I have very, like I said, extremely vague memories of when that was going on, because it was a big news story and people were legitimately like thinking, oh my God, this is going to crash on my house and stuff. Like, I mean, they had I don't remember this part of the story, but they actually had the EAS system, the emergency, system, like, okay, Skylab's down, everybody. Like, yeah, I mean, it was a big deal. I mean, there was a lot of, it's kind of embarrassing now because really it wasn't much of a danger, and thankfully it didn't hurt anybody when it landed on parts of Australia. But it really wasn't much of a danger to land or anything. Most of it probably, hopefully, went in the Indian Ocean. But so that was my first really vague memory of Skylab, like it coming back down, and and I remember a few years later, I lived not really far away from the Space Coast. So whenever there was a shuttle launch, me and I would go outside and watch the early shuttle launches. And this was before, this was pre Challenger. This was when the shuttle program was really first starting and starting to, pick up some speed. And I was obsessed. I was a space nerd. And I would, my mom, my parents would get me like space books and stuff like that, to sort of encourage it. And I remember reading the space books, and I can't remember what book this was. I couldn't tell you, but it had a thing about Skylab in it, and I was like, whoa, that looks really cool. It looked kind of like a spider. I thought it was really cool. But I knew it was a space station and people lived in it, and it had pictures, and it had the shower picture. It had pictures of, I think it had the picture of Ed and Jerry Carr, where he's like, the picture where Ed's being held up by Jerry Carr's finger, stuff like that. And it looked like a lot of fun. I was like, wow, this is really neat, and I'm about 5 seeing this, so I'm really little, and I didn't have any technical knowledge whatsoever about Skylab. All I knew, it was a space station and it looked really cool. So I think I put pictures of it on my wall when I was a kid, and I just thought it was the coolest looking. I just thought it was cool. Like I can't explain it. Um, it was just a totally nerdy fixation of mine. Like, I can't explain why I thought it was so cool. I
I
think
think
I
we
like.
get that on this. We get that.
Yeah, it's hard to
The
explain
nerdy
because,
part.
like, I can't there wasn't really a specific reason. I just thought it was like, wow, this looks really neat, and I thought the pictures from the program looked cool. Like, they looked like they were having a lot of fun in there, and they were having a lot of fun in there. They looked like they were just, enjoying the space that they had and everything like that. And as I got older and I got more into space flight, I read some books about Skylab, including Homesteading Space, and I really just fell in love with the program all over again because I was like, man, why isn't this not being talked about? That it's not it, and I think part of that is because it occupies a weird point in space history, which was the 70s. It was between the lunar landings, which were spectacular, and not to take credit from what they did, but lots of you know very spectacular, and the shuttle, which was also really spectacular. And I think Skylab and Apollo Soyuz are kind of in that middle part where it's like, yeah, we're just going to space, whatever, and it's not as spectacular to a lot of people. And to me, it's really amazing. But, to most people, they're like, nah, whatever. They weren't going to the moon, and stuff like that. But I just think so as I got older and I started reading about it, and I just started falling in love with it all over again. And then I started going to, like, astronaut scholarship foundation events and stuff like that. And I started to talk to the guys who had either worked or flew on Skylab, and here's where I get started on. Okay, I'll keep this blessedly short, but I remember one of the first crews I talked to as a crew, as an intact crew, was, I think, Skylab 4. And it was, when Pogue and Carr were still around. And that was at the point where I was like, okay, this mutiny crap has got to be untrue because these guys are just totally normal and cool. Like, there's no attitude. Like, they're not, I'm not seeing what other people wrote about whatsoever. These guys are just really cool and helpful, and and they seem like fun guys. Like, Pogue was really funny. Ed is funny as hell. Carr is really cool and calm. He's like kind of the epitome of a Marine. So I started to sort of talk to the guys from the missions, and they were just freaking awesome. I never got to speak to Conrad, unfortunately, because he died before I got the opportunity. But I mean,
way too young.
Yeah, he died really young.
Yeah, way too young.
But the rest of the guys I talked to, and they were just so freaking cool and helpful. I mean, if you had a question about anything, so really that's what got me into Skylab as a kid. I just thought it looked cool, and as an adult, I fell in love with it, sort of from a completely like a different perspective. I really fell for the people who worked and flew on that program because I just was like these guys are so cool, and you just don't hear as much about what they've done. I mean, and they deserve to have their story put out there in some way because you just don't hear about it as much. I mean, we've heard of I'll close with this. We've heard a million times about, Apollo 11, and that's not a diss against Apollo 11, but there's not many stories you can retell again about that, and it's like brand new, it's fresh, you know. And with Skylab, I feel like everything you hear about that program is brand new, because it's just not talked about as much. So that's really what I've got and why I love the program, and I'll probably continue. There's really nothing that won't get me to not like it ever. I'll probably be obsessed with it until the minute I croak. So that's really all I've got.
I gotta tell you, David here christened me a very endearing nickname, Captain Ahab, and it came about. And this leads into another. I'm sure all of us find it one of the favourite moments in Skylab. There was a prank that Owen Garriott played on the ground using his wife's voice that was pre-recorded via the private communication channel. And they recorded it on one of the tape recorders they had there to listen to music and so forth on. And she pretended she was on Skylab. And this audio, I tried to find it. David hadn't heard it. Emily, I don't think you ever even heard it, right? And this is right before we went out to Huntsville to speak with Owen. And I thought, I've got to find this. So David goes, if you can find it, that'd be great, but I don't think you can. How many hours was it where I go, hey, David, you'd never guess what I found?
The number of times Dwight was working on that movie that he would send me a message on Facebook and say, hey, look, do you have any leads at all on blank? Like, I'm looking for... I'm looking for Shepard dressing down the Skylab 4 crew. I'm looking for the tape of of Helen pretending she's on Skylab. I'm looking for the video of this, and I'm like, I have never seen it. I have never heard anybody acknowledge that it exists. And then like the next day, Dwight's like, oh yeah, I've got it. I mean, it's
and the best was right when I did the Skylab 4 mission reports. I wrote to Jerry Carr and I said, "Look, I'd like to send you a copy." And I explained the story. And he goes, "I really look forward to reading the book, Captain Ahab."
Oh my gosh!
And I went, "I've done it."
Oh my gosh!
Thanks, David.
The worst was. I heard a story, and we talked about the rating on this podcast, but a great story about the testing of the the waste management system, the space toilet on Skylab, and it's a story that even if I had known it when I was writing Homesteading, it couldn't have gone in Homesteading, but it's a great story. And so I had to share it with Dwight, and Dwight's like, "Yeah, I've got the video."
So I really want to hear that, but
I even found the audio from the conference where they're explaining how it all works. And the best thing is the film runs in reverse.
You spoil the ending. I'll tell you later, John.
That's okay.
That's all you need.
Actually, cut that out. Let David explain it. Sorry. Don't worry about my...
Yeah, I was like, whoa. And there's like, oh God, I don't need to see this. Okay.
Everybody's got to poop. I mean, it's funny. So I mean, you just got to laugh about it.
This has nothing to do with number 2, but or number 1, but they also tortured poor Ed Gibson in the name of science for Skylab 4. So there's actual pictures of him that they drew before the mission of his posture, and you can tell he's just like, I've had enough of this crap. Like his expression is just like, but they drew pictures of his posture I think they were based on photos, and some of the photos are available in archives, and I will never share them because he's not wearing much and he looks totally irritated. So it's pretty funny. So that,
I mean, the things you do to go to space. I mean,
yeah, he got to go to
that
space,
seems
exactly.
pretty. Yeah, I mean,
But
yeah.
they tortured that
Oh man.
child before and during Skylab 4. God bless him.
We'll have to talk about that later this year for Skylab 4.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah.
Just any final thoughts, I guess, for Skylab 3? I mean, there was tons of EVAs. There was what, 3 separate EVAs, I think, to get film from the Apollo telescope mount. They installed the twin pole sun shield. There's so many highlights from this mission. I feel like you can, wherever you shake a stick, you're hitting something for Skylab 3.
It was the coolest thing. Speaking to Jack about the spacewalks, he said that was the best part of the whole time he was up on Skylab. He just looked forward to it, and he said, you can go out there and you look for reasons to stay out there longer. So there's a couple of instances on the audio transcripts where I'm hearing Jack going, "Oh, the story. I think we've got a story Musgrave. I think we've got a blah blah blah, and it's going to take a little longer to fix." And I'm going, I wonder if that was true or not.
I can't blame Jack for doing that. I mean, if you've got that kind of view, hard to beat that.
You've got the Apollo guys who like you think are holy ground. That they are not human, right? And when there's a sequence of Jerry Carr talking in the film where the door opened to go outside and he just says, "Oh, do I really want to do this?" And it's like, for me, that was like, this guy is human. He's looking out the window going, be careful what you wish for because you might get it. and or like Ed Gibson always says, "Oh, I hope that Newton fellow was right."
Yeah, Alan Bean's description in Homesteading of going out for the EVA, because he's of the Skylab 3 crew, of the second crew, the only one that's been on an EVA before, because he's walked on the moon in Apollo 12, and just describing that difference of Apollo 12, you're there on a surface. It's technically a spacewalk, but it's like going outside, versus Skylab. It's like climbing out on the wing of a plane, and just his description of what it was like, when the hatch opened and he's first egressing the spacecraft is kind of incredible.
To me, the legacy, I guess, of Skylab 3 is they were called the Super Crew because they got a ton of work and then some. I think they reached 150% of their goals. And we'll talk more about that on the Skylab 4 episode, because there's kind of some leakage over from that.
Setting a benchmark.
Correct. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the next episode. But seriously though, Skylab 3, they did an incredible amount of work in space. And not only that, I think out of all the 3 Skylab crews, and I don't like to pick a favorite. That's like asking, God, which of your kids do you like the most? Or which niece or nephew do you like the most? You love all of them, but they just had a ton of fun up there. Like I think Alan Bean just kept everything really sort of very light. He's he was somebody who would listen to like sort of inspirational like tapes to get in, he would try to get inspired, and things like that. And he did kind of like self-help tapes, which is really cool. But I really feel like he kind of set the tone for the whole mission. And if you look at what they were doing, and they seemed to have a lot of fun, they were serious about their job. I don't want to make it sound like they were just chilling up there, but they if you look at like even the Skylab tour, you can tell Jack Lousma is having fun. He's having a good time. He's, it's not really super, heavy or anything like that. So that to me is the legacy of Skylab 3. And plus they did a ton of incredible work. They maintenance the space station. They put up the twin pole sunshade, which was not an easy feat at all. They still weren't meant to do spacewalks in that area. So that wasn't like, yeah, we'll just go outside and put up a blind, some Venetian blinds or something like that.
It's not like the ISS is now.
No,
there's not handrails everywhere.
Yeah, it wasn't made for that. So they, this was not an easy task. So they really did work very hard. But I don't know. I think the legacy for me is just they had fun and they got a lot of stuff done at the same time, and they really excelled. They were showing, how sort of I'm trying to search for the right words here, the evolution of, okay, we're going to space for a few weeks, to, okay, now we're actually going to try to live in space and see how this works, day to day, and and see how we can do this. So and yeah, it set a precedent for what we know today as the ISS as well. They do similar, not the same, but they do a lot of similar things, whereas they're learning how to live in space for long periods of time, which is different from, obviously, Apollo was like 7 to 14 days, so yeah, that to me is the legacy of it. And when we discuss Skylab 4, there's a lot more to discuss, as far as working and living in space, and schedules and how to work things out like that as well. So, but this was sort of the evolution of, okay, now we're going from camping trips to actually learning how to do this for, 6 weeks at a time or 8 weeks at a time. So that to me is Skylab 3's legacy. It was awesome. Okay, I'm done.
Emily talked earlier about Skylab gets forgotten partially because, and I 100% agree with this, because it's right in the wake of the moon landings. I mean, like 6 months after people were walking on the moon. It's right before the space shuttle program. The shuttle flew for 30 years, so people, there's a lot of history written about a lot of history. 100% agree that Skylab kind of gets lost between these two giants, but I also think Skylab is underappreciated somewhat because it's hard today to remember that we ever didn't know the things that Skylab taught us, that we ever needed to know what happens if you live in space for 2 months. I mean, like, that was ever a thing we needed to learn, or needed to know. You can fix things on a spacewalk. Like, that was a thing that once upon a time we didn't know. And Skylab is the program that taught us everything that's been the foundation of 50 years since. And in that light, the second crew kind of is even more than the others, because watching it, you wouldn't think you were learning anything. I mean, it's the most smooth, the most just straightforward American space mission, certainly compared to to Apollo before it, certainly compared to the other two Skylab missions, compared to the early shuttle. That, can you live in space? Yeah, we're going to go live in space. Can you do work on spacewalks? Yeah, we're going to do that. I mean, and they do. Can you work in space? Yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to do 150% of it. Like, there's no drama about it. There's no the excitement of, oh my gosh, can they do this? Isn't there? Because they go up there and they do the thing that they're there to do, and they come back. And I mean, like I said, you look at missions, going either way before or after it. And, I mean, there's no STS-1. Oh my gosh, the tiles fell off, and there's no, Skylab 3, ground to space issues. And there's no Skylab 1. Or Skylab 2, can we save the space station? I mean, it's just, they go up there, they do the thing, and then they come back. But in going up there and doing the thing and coming back, they show 100% conclusively, hey, you know what? We can go up there, we can do the thing, and we can come back. And I mean, and that's why we have Space Shuttle. That's why we have Space Lab. That's why we have ISS, is because we know, hey, yeah, you know what? You can go up there, you can do the thing, you can come back.
I like to refer to something that this wise man once said. He's pretty far up in the Skylab community. He said to me once, Skylab is the first time that orbit becomes a destination.
That sounds familiar.
Yes. David Smack, David Punch, David Hitt.
Now,
David Hitt, that's his name.
I never say that anymore. Like, that's yours. That little bon mot is purely for searching. I say the same thing in other ways when I do other talks, but that is reserved for you.
There's they did a lot of testing on SL3. The one that gets forgotten is the the MMU, the Man Maneuvering Unit, developed by Bruce McCandless and two other gentlemen, names escape me at the moment. And he worked to get that thing in an operational format that they could test it inside Skylab, because Skylab was so huge they could do it without exposing the astronaut to the dangers of being out in space. And these sort of things, and the MMU was then subsequently used on the shuttle. And you know, probably one of the most iconic photos of NASA is Bruce McCandless in that jetpack. 100 feet away or 300 feet from the
couple
shuttle.
Hundred, yeah.
And you just think, whoa. Whether I could do something like that, I don't know. I mean, incredible stuff. Just the entire, or observing the hurricanes and ocean currents and so forth that they were doing up there. That was the first time we started looking inwards. You know, everybody was like, prior to that, we're going exploring to the moon or to outer space or sending probes to Mars. And with Skylab, they turned the cameras back down on Earth for the most part. There was the solar investigations, but for the most part, Skylab was up there to be a laboratory in the sky, and they were looking at Earth, observing droughts in Africa and so forth. And I think the thing that hit me the most from the legacy of Skylab was being at the STEC Open Day in, I think it was 2016, 2017, where Dirk Filmont, I think his name is, one of the Belgian astronauts for ESA, he said, we do not have enough scientists to analyze all the data that they collected on Skylab. They still haven't gone through the data collected on Skylab 50 years later because they don't have enough specialized scientists to actually analyze it. And it's like, whoa. And the Russians were even thanking the Skylab crew for having all that open data that they could plan their Mir missions. This is the Skylab is the foundation of everything to do with orbital living in space that came afterwards. It's very underappreciated.
And this is like why I love history. Me personally is I've been reading a lot of books by Neil Postman lately. So it's been getting me on this whole thing about like the history of technology and how when we're learning, like we learn about biology or chemistry or computers or something, learning the history of that science is important. And that's what's so cool about Skylab is it's literally the science of how humans live and work in space. And we have the history of that for future generations to study, which is just so cool. And, you know, we're at 50 years since the first mission. What's it going to be in 100 years? You know, I'm sure those lessons that were learned in Skylab are still going to be applicable then. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, if we're around, hopefully, knock on wood, be around in 50 years for that next anniversary. But it's just wild to think about how we literally learned, you know, orbit was the destination, as David and Dwight, you've said. That's so cool to me. So I think that's as good a point as any to end on for Skylab 3. We'll be back later this year for a little Skylab. Well, not little. We may have to break Skylab 4 up into 2 parts.
Thank you for doing this. This is the first time the three of us have ever done a Skylab conversation like this, and this has been so much fun.
Yes, thank you.
Just getting
It's
to
cool.
do this. So we appreciate you having us and letting us have this chat. And always a pleasure to talk to you about it.
Thank you, guys.
Been a lot of fun.
If I may paraphrase David Hitt, John Mulnix is the first time that the three of us get a destination. Oh, it didn't work. It was funny in the head. Oh, by the way, we'll do this for Skylab 4. It's not called Skylab anymore. It resides in Australia now. So, and this is an old joke, and it's hilarious for me, at least. It's still. It's called Skylab.
I was going to say, for the next one, you need to recast me with Francis French doing his David Hitt talking about Skylab impression, and it'll be far more entertaining.
Oh my gosh.
We could do impersonations of each other. That'd be great.
Or like an Australian slang.
Yeah, exactly.
Like have some slang for that, because like I've seen some pretty hilarious stuff. I've heard some hilarious stuff, so we may have to include that in with the next one.
Skylab is the first time that orbit becomes a destination.
Imagine if Phil Chapman had actually gotten a chance to fly in Skylab. That would have been
going down there, boys.
that would have been fun. That would have been beautiful.
Again, I mean, if anyone from Apple is listening, I we're available for consulting for all mankind, but I think sadly they've already moved past that era in the alternate timeline. So I think we've missed our shot for that,
Spinoff.
Unfortunately. But
Spinoff is the answer.
Spinoff, yeah, there we go.
And this is doable.
Oh man, well, thank you guys. Thank you all for coming on. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
Looking forward to the next show.
Yes, thank you.
That's it for this episode. We're going to do another deep dive for Skylab 4 later this year, so make sure you keep your eyes on the feed and the Substack for more details. I'll be announcing it beforehand, so there's time for everyone to get questions sent in if you would like to ask one. Let me know about your favorite Skylab mission or highlight. Drop me a line at john@thespaceshot.com or send me a message on Substack. Speaking of Substack, be sure you sign up. The link is in the show notes. You're going to want to be signed up so you can get entered to win some cool prizes as we celebrate 50 years of Skylab. I'd also appreciate it if you could leave a review through your podcast platform of choice. It really helps other people find out about the show. And until next time, I'm John Molnix, and I'll catch you on the flip side.